So I wanted to take a moment today to sort of look back and reflect a bit on this week, but also just the entire generation, because what we are witnessing right now just is not normal for a game console. Looking at what we had with that recent Nintendo Direct, there are people who are really high on it. There are some who are like, I just don't really see the hype or what's so exciting about it. But I think when you put the Direct and the announcements in context, it's hard not to be impressed by what Nintendo showed here going through the rest of this year into 2025, since we are in the system's 8th year, and I really do think that shows just how strong the system continues to be and how really impressive it is when you compare it to other systems and their 8th year, which we're going to go over some of that stuff here today. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. Now, if we look at these are all the announcements from the Direct. And Nintendo will do this. They'll put out a card where they put all the logos in there, and then most times we'll also have, I know there's someone on Reddit who will take these different logos and try to match them up for the rest of, say, 2024, along with some third-party ones. So you kind of get like a little running calendar of all the announcements and where they are placed in the year. So you have kind of just a release lineup going to the end of 2024 and then seemingly starting 2025. And there's still some other stuff that I think we're still waiting on release dates for, like third parties and that sort of thing. But for the most part, I think we're set up here for the rest of the year. But as I mentioned, we are now in the 8th year of the Switch's life. So that the 7th year ended March 3rd. And that means we're almost 4 months in to the 8th year of the system, which if you go back and look at any other system, you can even look at some of Nintendo's previous ones, although the most recent comparison with the Wii U isn't very favorable for that system, considering Nintendo moved on from that very, very quickly. I mean, it was like 4 years later, they're like, nope, NX, we're moving on pretty quick, right? It just didn't work out for them there. But you go back to previous ones, most of the time, a generation would last 5 or 6 years. Like the Xbox, the original Xbox, infamous for having a very short life cycle. I mean, it was 4 years and boom, we're on to the Xbox 360. There's a cross-gen period, sure, but to me, once that new system is not only shown but also released, clearly the focus shifts to that new system from like within the first party studios, but also third parties. And we saw that with the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, which also had, I'd say, pretty lengthy life cycles. I mean, it went from 2013 to holiday 2020. It got a solid 7-year life cycle then when all the focus was on it, even though we had like the PS5 announced like a year before it came out or something, right? There was still focus on a PlayStation 4 that had a very large install size, and the Xbox One, sure, like half the install size, but there were still a number of people there to sell to. And even with the PS5 out, we had a cross-gen period that was fairly prolonged, even from first party, where we had God of War Ragnarok, right? It was on PS5 and PS4, Horizon Forbidden West, PS5, PS4, Gran Turismo 7. I mean, it got to the point where Sony was under scrutiny because of that. Like, they kept putting stuff on the previous generation systems. And now with the Switch, though, we don't have that new system officially unveiled. It's been announced. Nintendo's referred to it, but that's kind of it. Like, hey, we're working on a next-gen system. We're going to unveil it in this current fiscal year, but that could technically mean that they could show it at the end of February 2025, and they would still fit right into that fiscal year. I don't think they're going to wait that long, but they could do that. They could end up releasing this thing at the end of 2025 at this rate. But if you consider that, right? So the 8th year for the PS4 and then the Xbox One would mean that at this time for the Switch, we would be 3 months into 2021 for those systems, and it would still be the primary focus for Sony and then Microsoft. So when I look at this list of games that were announced during that Nintendo Direct, which includes a new top-down Zelda game with Echoes of Wisdom. And I might do a video on that because it is genuinely interesting the more I look at the trailer and consider what they can do with that game. So it feels very, very unique and original, even though it still follows the same kind of perspective of that top-down Zelda game and even borrows the entire art style and graphical style from Link's Awakening, right? The game we had remade then on the Switch, where it kind of looked like toys sort of running around, little dioramas and stuff. But they also have Mario and Luigi Brothership, brand new game there with the Mario and Luigi franchise, one that people thought it was just over, like we're not getting else from it. Like Super Mario Party Jamboree, of course, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, which is a game that should have come out by now, but we know there were issues with it and they rebooted it, but they stuck with it, and it's on the way. And then outside of that, we do still have third-party titles like with Square Enix and Dragon Quest 3 HD2D and Dragon Quest 1 and 2, and yeah, remakes too. Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. But I look at the games that are going to the Switch now, and I know many people, I'll just say it now, sure, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, that's going as well. The Fighting Collection logo is right there, where I see you guys. But I look at the number of games that are going to the platform now, especially even from first party, who would still be working on right now games for the next system. In fact, I think that's the major holdup within Nintendo. I don't think it has anything to do with the hardware. I think the hardware is I think it's been ready. I think they're just trying to make sure they have a strong lineup for that first year, similar to they did with the Switch. It worked really well. I mean, if you have Breath of the Wild and then you have Mario Odyssey coming out in the same year, I mean, that alone is a good year, but then they had a lot of other stuff hit as well, which included a new IP in ARMS. Of course, you brought up the ever-selling, evergreen Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, unstoppable at this point. And you have a recipe for success. So I think that's what they're doing, but it's hard to really think about that when you see all of these games that are just being unveiled constantly from them, where there are releases seemingly every single month just about to the end of 2024. And then we look into 2025 with some other games. So I kind of wonder if this right now is sort of like back with the PS2. Like, we lived through that generation. Well, okay, many of us lived through that generation where you were at least aware of video games and different titles coming out. Maybe you're reading in the magazines and stuff. But looking back on it, now we realize that was Sony's best generation when it comes to just selling hardware. And that is one that is pretty much impossible to replicate. I also think back to the Wii with Nintendo, where it was pretty obvious it was a massive hit for them, and it sold incredibly well, right? In terms of like acceleration of sales, it happened very, very rapidly, and then of course it fell off. But you look back to that moment, you'd go there and be like, wow, this really is this moment in time that's hard to replicate. Probably the DS as well. I kind of think we are in that moment right now with the Switch, where 10, 15 years from now, we're going to look back on this, and who knows, this thing with Nintendo, how Nintendo has it projected currently, because we know the sales numbers here, 141.32 million with their current projections for this fiscal year, their goals. It place it right up alongside of the DS. And in fact, it would probably pass it then. That's at, what's that at, 154 million? Yeah, it would put it right there. It's like 13.5 is what they're trying to hit. Now seeing not only the games that they have, but they also have that gold Switch Lite, the Zelda-themed one. I mean, come on, that's going to sell really well. That might just come down to how many can they produce. But then on top of this, we do still see sales, for example, in, here we go, in Japan, have really, really continued to do well, which is still, it's mind-blowing to me because they've sold over 33 million systems there, and it just seems to continue selling. I don't know who's really buying these things anymore, although some have mentioned that it's selling in Japan and then it's being like shipped out to places like China, so people are kind of scalping it that way. But they just keep selling. I mean, this was a down week for it, and it still topped the charts with 38,500 systems. To my understanding, in the U.S., it's dropped off considerably. And again, it's in the 8th year, and I feel like everybody who wants a Switch has one at this point, and maybe they're collecting it for more novelty's sake with something like a Legend of Zelda Switch Lite. That's very possible. But I do feel like we are getting to the point where it's hard for Nintendo to sell them, and it makes sense why they would then move on to the next generation. But the Switch is very much going to be a 10-year system, which that was their goal when they set out, apparently, was let's see if we can make this thing last 10 years. And it looks like it's going to happen. And I mean, we're 8th year now. Like I said, let's say the new system doesn't come out until first quarter of 2025, we'll say. That would be a full 8 years before the next system's on the market. Cross-gen period of maybe 2 years, and then it sort of rides off into the sunset until Just Dance is ready to be done with it. You know, I'd logged into the 360 recently because I was doing a video on the store in its final days. They're like Just Dance 2018. Did you know that 2018 was on the Xbox 360? I had no idea. And it's just, games like that will try to get as much as they can out of the Switch. So, yeah, the Switch could go on into, could go on to like 2030 with something like, with Just Dance. So, who knows with that one. But it's something I kind of had this thought. I said, wow, we really are living through one of those generations that I get why people look at it now and go, this might be like one of the best systems of all time. In terms of its library, it is kind of hard to argue that because, sure, it is missing Call of Duty, it's missing Madden, but let's say EA decides to just drop one on there towards the end of life just to see what happens with the install size being so large. And Microsoft said they were going to try to get some kind of Call of Duty on the Switch, so maybe they push one there. And then it's like, well, they have all the mainstream titles. They have a ton of games from Nintendo first-party wise that also dates back to like their entire history with the NSO stuff. And then they had a lot of third-party games go on there. It is a very deep library. So yeah, I kind of understand. And then also obviously the hybrid nature and it being able to sort of fit into people's lifestyles that maybe weren't able to play games as much prior to the Switch existing, and sort of how I kind of feel like it's also changed the way that even these companies are looking at games now, clearly with things like the Steam Deck and these PC handhelds. I think that's also kind of spurred on by what Nintendo was doing with the Switch. So it's something maybe you don't realize in the moment, but will 5 or 10 years from now. And it is impressive stuff to see the list of games that they're presenting here in that Direct in its 8th year is one of the reasons that I can look at that and say, you know what, that was a really good Direct, because it's not something I would expect from any other system 8 years into the generation, basically. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Do you look at the Switch generation and realize this is just not a normal thing we're seeing right now? Or are you expecting Nintendo to go on to the Switch 2 and maybe sell more of that system, do bigger and better things there? Because while I think visually games will look better and they'll perform better in terms of frame rate and stuff, I don't know if they're necessarily going to be able to capture what they did here with the Switch, because it's not a common thing to see in gaming at all. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.